Hi there. Let's talk today about finishing off your first draft and looking at those key areas when it comes time to revise. Now, one of the things that I stress a lot in the Write Your First Novel Now program is getting that first draft done. Like it's not supposed to be perfect. It doesn't need to be edited when you're writing it. You just need to get it done, because if you never get the first draft done, you will never be able to revise it and make it more awesome than it already is. So the key for us is always, always, always get that first draft done. And that doesn't mean it's going to be perfect. It just needs to be done. So to prove this point, let's look at some famous writers and what they say about first drafts and revising and so on. So take Margaret Atwood as an example. She says, "If I waited for perfection, I would never write a word." So the point being here, just get the words out onto the page. Then you can tweak them. You can do your wordsmithing magic later. But you've got to be able to put out a rough copy first. Here's one from Robert Graves. "There is no such thing as good writing, only good rewriting. And that is the truth." So the first draft of anything, just like Hemingway says, the first draft of anything is crap, and I'm paraphrasing, but it is. It's going to be rough. It's going to have inconsistencies. You're going to be naming characters different names, for the same guy. That stuff happens in a first draft. So, but the key is, if you don't get the first draft done, you'll never be able to revise it into a really nice finished copy of your book. Nora Deloach says, "Writing is rewriting. If you fall in love with the vision you want of your work and not the words, the rewriting will become easier." Right? So keep the vision, keep that main story, the big picture in mind as you're going through. The words are the little bits and pieces that go together to create the story, but you can always change those. Don't fall in love with specific words just because you might think that, well, this is how you write. You're supposed to use big words, blah, blah, blah. No, don't do that. Don't do that. Focus on the overall story, and the words will sort themselves out. James Michener, "I'm not a very good writer," he says, "but I'm an excellent rewriter." So you're getting the picture here that it's important to get the first draft done, and then you can go back and revise and make it better. You will never make it perfect. If you're trying to make it perfect, that's an exercise in futility, and you'll drive yourself absolutely nuts. So don't do that. But get that first draft done, and then you can go and begin revising it. So what does that actually look like? So I've got 5 main areas to consider when you're revising your work. Now, before you spend a lot of time going through each chapter or each section, make sure that the first draft is actually finished. Like, you haven't left pieces out. You've got a full story there from beginning to middle to end. And you're not leaving parts out, because if you do, that means you don't have a finished first draft, and that's the most important thing to have. And then when you go back later to revise, that's when you're going to add in the color and fix the writing and the consistencies. You're going to check your logic. You'll put in some juicy words to make it more interesting and all of those good things. So the basic steps then are to finish the first draft, establish the overall story with that, and then revise section by section, chapter by chapter, paying attention to things like word choice, logic, structure, pacing, consistency, all of those good things that we stress in the Write Your First Novel Now program. All right, so once you've finished your first draft, I always recommend setting it aside for at least a week or two, so you can give yourself some distance from that first draft, because fresh eyes will see things that tired eyes won't. So when you do pick it up after a week or two with your fresh eyes, you're going to see things that you missed, and those will be important to fix. So what are those things to look for? Let's take a look at the 5 things. The first one is story structure, the structure of the story itself. Now, if you follow the Write Your First Novel Now program, you're already following a structure. It's the quest structure, essentially. And if you map this out and you've done the roadmap like we stress, and you know your plot points and everything else, then your structure should not be an issue. It should be okay if you've been following your roadmap all along, because that is the structure that we're following. But if you haven't followed a proven story structure, you may find that the story itself is muddled, and that means that the underlying structure needs to be strengthened. And what I see a lot with writers who want to write by the seat of their pants and just go and let the characters organically figure out what's going to happen, all of that great stuff. Well, what inevitably happens is the beginning starts off really nicely, lots of action, good conflict, tension, all of those things. But then you can see the writer is getting tired, and the pacing gets all askew. The plot points don't make sense, and there's a lack of tension in the story that will drive your reader. So this emphasizes for me the need to have a really good proven structure, whether that's the quest or one of the other time-tested, proven structures you follow. Doesn't really matter, but you've got to follow one. There's a reason why these story structures have been around forever, and that is because they work. Readers like them, viewers like them, and it makes just more sense to write a story following a structure that has been proven. So that's the first thing. Check out your story structure. If you find that the story is muddled and it's not working, the issue may be the lack of an underlying structure. So you'll need to strengthen that. The second thing is story logic. So ask yourself, as you're going through your first draft, does the story flow smoothly from one section to another? Does it flow nicely from one chapter to another? Does the time track properly? That's an important one. Are there leaps of logic in there? Are the characters' goals clear? Now, the characters, you don't have to state the characters' goals, but they should be clearly implied so that the reader knows what the hero's trying to accomplish, and what the villain is trying to do as well, and the other primary characters in your story. It needs to be clear to the reader what they're after and what their motivation for this is. So if that's not clear, whether it's clearly stated or it's implied, then you'll need to make sure that it is, because that'll be important for grounding your reader. The third thing then is pacing. Does your story flow smoothly? So here's a hint. Again, if you're following the proven structure that we use in Write Your First Novel Now, this is not an issue. Because we take a basic 75,000 word novel, we divide it up into 60 sections. Each section is roughly around 1,250 words each. So if you follow that structure, then your pacing is already built in. You don't have to worry about it. But again, if you're writing by the seat of your pants, you will run into problems with pacing. I see it all the time. So you have to be really careful if you're not following a proven structure or a roadmap. You have to watch your pacing. So this pacing is how smoothly the story flows. Like it's unraveling in a good time at a good pace. You don't have some chunks of your book that are moving way too quickly and others that are way too sluggish. No, you don't want that. You want a nice, smooth, consistent pace throughout your story. The fourth thing to consider is the style, and that's your style. Now, we can talk a lot about what it means to develop a writing style, but essentially what your style is is an amalgamation of everything that you've written and seen and lived and experienced. So that all of those elements feed into what your style is. And this is why each one of us has a unique style. We are influenced, of course, by others, but we develop our own style ourselves. So, but there are some things to think about when it comes to style. First of all, have you used any cliches in your story? So as narrator in the story, have you used cliches? Like, it's one thing for a character to use cliches, that might be part of their character, but not for the narration, not for the prose itself. You want to avoid those. Come up with your own way of saying something, so that it's not cheating in a sense of just throwing in a cliche there. There's a reason why sayings are called cliches, and that's because, well, it takes no effort to come up with those. It takes more effort, and it's more fun to come up with your own way of saying something. Now, the other thing about style, sometimes spelling and grammar is lumped in with style as well, and that can be true. So let's look at spelling and grammar. Look, you need to be consistent. If you're writing for a U.S. audience, you want to make sure that the spelling is American spelling. If you're writing for a British or a Canadian audience, then you want to make sure that the spelling reflects the British or Canadian spelling. So and to avoid mixing them. Like, now, it doesn't really matter which one you choose. You can certainly use British spelling for things that are being read by folks in the U.S. That's not an issue. The trouble can often happen when you mix them up. So, for example, if you spell color C-O-L-O-R, that's the American spelling, and then 2 chapters later you're spelling color C-O-L-O-U-R, the British way to spell it, then that's no good. Like, you've got to be consistent with that sort of thing. So that's the most important thing to check with your spelling, and you can use your word processor for that. The other thing that can be just as important, in fact, if not more important, is grammar and other elements of writing. So this is where I use a tool. I use ProWritingAid, and I've got a link to ProWritingAid in the notes here. But you can check out ProWritingAid. It does a lot more than check your spelling and grammar. It looks for things like overuse of words and echoes and pronoun overuse and all of those sorts of things that help your writing come alive. So I highly recommend picking one. Like, ProWritingAid is just one, but Grammarly, there's even MS Word has a lot of things that you can use. But use those tools. They're there for us to use, and they can make a huge difference in your story. So a couple of other things, talking more about style part 2, is beware of sentences beginning with ing. So, okay, so this is the thing that makes my eye twitch, and oh my goodness, like, if you're doing this, don't do it. Here's an example. Watching the sunset, the air felt cool on my face. Watching the sunset, the air felt cool on my face. Okay, now, you were taught in grade school that this was great writing. If you do things like this, oh, this is great writing. Please do. Oh, no. But here's the thing. It doesn't make any sense. The way that sentence is structured, it sounds like the air is watching the sunset. No, it's not. So you would change that. You would fix that by saying, watching the sunset, I felt the cool air on my face. Now it's grammatically correct. But the bigger question is, why would you want to start a sentence with an ing verb? Why would you want to do that? You do this because you were taught in grade school that this was good writing, and so that's why you do it, to get the pat on the head and the smiley face from the teacher. Don't do that. Stop it. If you're doing this, stop it. It's really annoying for readers, and it's not good writing. Just write the story the way you would tell it over a cup of coffee with a friend. Just use normal words, normal syntax. Just, keep it simple. Don't try to make it all fancy like this. So that's a big bugaboo, starting a sentence with an ing verb. So don't do that. And if it's not clear, don't do it. Now, the other thing is passive and active voice. We talk a lot about the to be verbs in our programs. It was a dark and stormy night. The clouds were gray. It points to telling the reader rather than showing them the scene. And that's a whole other discussion. But one thing to be careful of is as you're going through and revising your first draft is to check for the passive voice that's in there. So look for verbs. If you're using really pedestrian verbs, get rid of them and replace them with better action verbs. And replace the passive voice with an active voice. The only time you wouldn't do this is if you're doing it intentionally, like for dramatic effect. So think of Charles Dickens' Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. Okay, so someone might say, "Oh, that's telling. That's an example of telling." Yeah, but it's done for dramatic effect, and so that's why it's used. So keep an eye out for your passive voice in your first draft and fix it up where it makes sense to fix it up. And if you're not fixing it up, then it must be there for by intention for dramatic effect. Okay, I've got lots of other things, of course, that we can talk about when it comes to revising, but those are the main things. Those would be the 4 or 5 main things that you should be looking for. There are lots of other ways to improve your writing. One thing, just as an example, never start the 3 sentences in a row with the same verb or the same word, right? He sat down. He took off his shoes. He wondered about her. Like, don't do that. But there are probably 100 of those things to keep an eye out for. But if you've got a good piece of software helping you out with your grammar and style, you're going to catch most of those anyway. So I think if you use a good piece of software, you'll be able to catch a lot of those. And I may do another, I might do another podcast later on a few of those really specific things to watch out for when it comes to editing and revising. But for now, I think that's those are the main things to consider when you're sitting down to revise your first draft. So you've got to have a first draft to begin with. Then you want to check your story structure. You want to check the logic in the story, the consistency, the pacing and the style in your story, and keep an eye out for passive voice in your writing. Okay, so that's it for today. Keep writing, and as always, if you'd like some help with what you're working on, feel free to drop me a line, and we'll talk about what we can do together.